All right, everybody, welcome in if it's your first time on the Fit Pro Show, and welcome back if you've been on before. We're now in part 3 of our series talking about building a health and fitness routine. So we already talked about how to warm up properly. We talked about strength training as well. And then today, of course, we're going to talk about cardiovascular training, which is another really fun one that I know Hannah and it's going to be hard to limit it at 30 minutes, but continuously throughout our show today, if you have questions, please keep them coming in the chat box. We'll get to them if we can here today. If not, we always follow up with a full worksheet of what we talked about and then your distinct questions too. So yeah, make sure that you keep those coming. And I think we can go ahead and get rolling. We talked about cardio a little bit yesterday as we were planning and everything. I think a good place to start is just talking about what the heck it is. And it can be really simple to talk about. And we're going to get in the weeds with some of the more technical aspects of cardio and different types. But really, cardio is just any activity, especially any repetitive activity that gets that heart rate up, gets our respiration up, and then we're using those like big muscle groups to burn calories. And of course, that cardiovascular means heart. Is there anything, Hannah, that you would add to that very simple description there to just get us started off?
No, you hit it right on the dot. Any type of movement that you increase that heart rate, increase your respiration, and you're using very large muscle groups simultaneously throughout.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll talk about those types a little bit more before we get into those types of cardio and how to actually write your exercise plan. We want to talk about, okay, why do we perform cardio? A lot of people, some people love it. It gets a bad rap sometimes. Hannah, do you want to get us started off with maybe some of the benefits, and I'll follow up with you?
Yeah, so when we're kind of talking about cardio, there's like two big words that stand out in the fitness industry realm as we hear anaerobic and aerobic. So there are two different forms of cardio. Aerobic is just continuous movement fueled by oxygen you breathe. So it's going to be the longer durations. The oxygen is what's giving you the energy to continue moving going for those long runs or hikes or cross-country skiing or whatever it is you're doing. And then the anaerobic movement is the short bursts of high intensity movement that's fueled by energy that's stored inside your muscles. So we've got aerobic fueled by oxygen, and then anaerobic that's fueled by the energy in your muscles. And we have different energy systems. Do we want to tap into those energy systems before we go into the benefits, David?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I think we can go ahead and do that.
Okay. So I kind of like geek out over this stuff because this was in school. I remember just being so fascinated with learning about these at first. At first, I hated it. I was like, this is so complicated. I don't understand all these big words. And then once I started to understand, it's really cool. So I'm just going to give like a little breakdown and simplify it as much as I can. If you have more specific questions and you want to learn more, feel free to reach out to either of us. But we have 3 main energy systems that give us our energy to get moving in that cardiovascular or strength training way, however you're moving. All of them are performed throughout the exercise that you're doing. It just depends on the duration and intensity of which one's getting utilized the most. So these 3 like pathways of energy is our number 1, like ATP, PCR. So I'll explain that a little bit more. Number 2, we have anaerobic glycolysis. And number 3, we have oxidative or aerobic. So those 3 different pathways are what give us our energy. ATP PC is like 10 to 30 seconds. That's your like all out sprint. You're going to be using the ATP, which is energy that's stored inside our muscles to get your body to do that at full max energy. Going into number 2 is that anaerobic or glycolysis. That's like 30 seconds to 3 minutes of movement. You're going to be using your carbohydrate stores to produce the ATP that gives you that energy. Then going into our third one is oxidative or aerobic, that pathway. that's where we're using the oxygen to help with our energy production. It also taps into some other macronutrients like the fat and protein compared to our anaerobic that was just purely carbohydrates. And that's a little more low to moderate activities. So that's like a brief overview of what's kind of going on cellularly to give us the energy to do our cardio, to burn fat and carbohydrates, sprint as hard as we can, or go for longer runs. You tap into all three, but some get used more than others depending on that duration and intensity.
Yeah, that was a great overview of those three, and it can be confusing, so don't get worried. Like we said, the worksheet is coming through with everything, but just to give you some examples of each of those three that Hannah just talked about, that ATP PC system, if you want to know what that is, like phosphagen creatine system, those really explosive movements. So like an explosive jump, a really intense short sprint, something like that. I think 10 seconds or less, like she was saying, you know, really fast, need fuel right away. That's one of those. And then when you get into that anaerobic, again, both of these you're not using that oxygen. Any 30-second interval of something hard that you can think of, that's basically what we're talking about. Kettlebell swings, tough set of burpees, 15 med ball slams, whatever it is, things that you do if you come to class, or you do any type of like HIIT interval training, a lot of that type of stuff. And then, yeah, Hannah said 3 minutes. Really, you know, if you're getting to that, 3 minutes is definitely right. If you're getting it past that like 60 to 90 second zone, a lot of the times you're in this aerobic oxidative state anyways, right? Whether it's swimming, biking, rowing, running, whatever. And it's good to know the difference between these, because often right now, and unless you're listening doing HIIT intervals right now, we are in that aerobic system. We're in this most of the time because the oxygen is just so readily available for us, and so we have that available substrate to use for fuel, right, to do just these basic activities, right? And it's the same thing if you're working at a lower intensity. When those demands increase, that's when we're forced to use those other energy systems, change into those other energy systems, and that's how we fuel the body. So a lot of the times when we hear about, I know for me, when I hear about cardio and people talk about it, people are like, oh, it's hard, it makes me sweat, or things like that, which is good. It's good to note those sensations, but just know that those aren't necessarily adaptations. You know, you're not pushing your lactic threshold or your VO2 max or anything like that, right? So I think it's important to not only know these systems, but know why, other than the like health benefits of it, but why do we need to train work capacity to work through some of these different energy systems? And when I answer that question, or I'm talking to somebody about cardio, I have two things that come to mind for me, and it's very simple. It's a short-term response that we get from it, and then a long-term response that we get from some of these energy systems. So if we talk about that short-term response, our EPOC, which just means excess post oxygen consumption, right? And that's just a way to say that we're ramping up that metabolism, that calorie burning after a session. So if you're doing higher intensity exercise, you're going to be burning more calories when you're outside of the gym. So high intensity cardio, or even high intensity resistance training. Today we're talking about cardio, but even high intensity resistance training has been shown. I read a study that it increased EPOC up to 38 hours. Think about that. That's almost 2 days, everybody. So if you want to continue burning that fuel, that short-term response, even if it's 5 or 10 minutes of really hard work, can be a really good way to get that done. So that's our short term. And then when we're talking about more of a longer term, so many sessions of this type of work, then we're talking about increases in resting metabolism or basal metabolic rate, same thing, right? You're burning energy at rest, right? So most of the calories that we burn are completely at rest. Almost 2/3 of the energy that we're burning, that total calories in a given day, are from just being at rest. So if we can positively affect that resting metabolic rate, then we can turn our bodies into these fat burning machines. And I know that sounds good for anybody that wants to either maintain your current body composition or improve your body composition.
Yeah, all great information there. And I think touching just a little bit more on what that EPOC really means is that like our body has a certain amount of like oxygen stores in it throughout. And so when we need to hit our EPOC, it's usually because we've drained those oxygen stores, and the harder you work throughout like that HIIT workout or training session, your body needs to recover and get those oxygen stores back up, which takes more calories. So like when we talk a little bit later about that, like what's better, HIIT or LISS, which is low steady state cardio, there's so much conflicting evidence against the both, and it's super interesting to see what each person's take is on it. There is no like better way to do cardio than the other. I think the best way is to do it and incorporate all the different types of cardio into your training.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree. So if we're talking about those types, and we can talk about the benefits just along the way, we can scatter it along the way, Hannah, if you want to. But when we're talking about, okay, the different types of energy systems, but now, okay, how much should we actually be performing? How often, how long, a number of workouts, those types of things. They're all kind of relative to what your fitness level is, but there are some really good recommendations out here, which are good, from the American Heart Association. Their recommendations get at least 150 minutes. So that's 2.5 hours of moderate intensity aerobic activity throughout the entire week, or you can get 75 minutes. So that's an hour and 15 minutes of vigorous, that higher intensity activity per week. And just like Hannah mentioned, you can do both of them. You can mix and match. It doesn't have to be, okay, I'm all in for vigorous, I'm all in for moderate. You can mix and match those a little bit. And the great thing is that if you do even more than that, so if you double that, for, if you do 300 minutes, you do 5 hours of cardio throughout the week, then you get even more benefits. It's dose dependent.
What constitutes, David or Hannah, moderate intensity? Like what heart rate, or what degree of resistance?
Yeah, there's like 5 main heart rate zones when they're kind of looking at it, like zone 1 through zone 5. Moderate is usually around zone 2 and 3. So that's going to be from like 60 to 80% of your heart rate max. The most basic way to calculate your heart rate max is 220 minus your age. So me, I'm 25, so that would put me at 195 as my heart rate max. So if I want to be in that moderate zone, that's where I'm and it depends on my intensity, look at 60 to 80% of 195 for me. And that's where I would keep my heart rate within during that 150 minutes of exercise I did for that week.
Yeah, that's perfect. I completely agree, and we'll talk a little bit more about like how to do that. So you can go through percentages of that, like she just said. Something we hear a lot is that fat burning zone, which is about 70 to 80%, and we can talk about why that is a good number, but it's not an end all be all. But another way, if you're not a numbers driven person and you want to know, hey, am I low, moderate, or high right now? I just don't know. A simple way to measure that relative intensity too is just like a simple talk test. So if you're if you can hold an entire conversation like I'm talking right now, obviously that's pretty low intensity, right? I can probably walk and talk with a friend and get some work done. If you go to more of a moderate, then you can talk, but you can't like belt out your favorite song, right? You can't sing, you can't have a full-on conversation. You're probably more in that moderate zone. And then if you're doing true high intensity cardiovascular work, you can't say more than just like a couple of words without pausing for a breath, because you're really putting that work in.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it too, and it's a little bit easier throughout your workout if you don't want to do the calculations. But if you do like ahead of time do those calculations, it is fun to like look at, if you have one of those watches telling you your heart rate, to figure out exactly like where you're at. I know we have HP engineers on, so they like numbers too, so different ways that you can approach trying to hit that 150 minutes of moderate or 75 minutes of vigorous. And again, those are just like the baselines. I think about it, and when I'm doing teaching Q Fit Hit or taking Zach or Jenny's boot camp class, like that all really adds up. Like it's not too challenging to hit those numbers if you're looking at like, oh, I went for a 10-minute walk here or a 15-minute walk here at a pretty brisk pace, and that's some moderate exercise. So trying to hit those numbers, it's look at your week, look at how much minutes of exercise you're really getting in that cardio zone.
Yeah, that was good. And thank you, Vincent, here in the chat box. He just put an online heart rate zone calculator, so it makes it easier if you just want to put it in right there, plug it in and figure it out. Use that. Thank you very much. That's cool.
There you go.
So yeah, so we were talking about amount. I do want to talk more about intensity and types of exercise, but so with those recommendations though, it's always a good idea to increase that amount and intensity gradually over time. Just like we've talked about with strength training, just like we've talked about with any other type of exercise or activity, slowly improving like that. And our fifth episode of this series is going to be all about progression. So not just where to start, but how you can continue getting better. So there's more to come on that. But two other things I did want to note about that is, another thing that's just generally good for your health is spend less time sitting. Even little light intensity activity can really offset a lot of the risks that come along with just being sedentary, not moving your body at all. So that's a good note. And then I'm always going to talk about strength training, no matter what our episode is. They also recommend performing like moderate to high intensity muscle strengthening activity, any type of resistance training, at least twice per week, which is in alignment with what we've said in the past too.
Yeah. And I think if you're needing any extra motivation on like, why should I do cardio? Like, I know I really love to strength train, and cardio is not the most like enjoyable thing for me to do. You just sometimes got to look at different ways to do it. Like David had said, like you can even just do strength training in circuit styles, and we'll talk a little more about some modalities, but I think tapping into a little bit more of like the why. So the like link and studies that cardiovascular exercise has shown to reduce a ton of chronic conditions is awesome. So reducing our chances of obesity, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, stroke, certain types of cancers, osteoporosis, adding the weight to the bones. And I think like sometimes I really need to tell people, yes, you love to strength train, but our heart is our most important muscle in our body. Cardio exercise is what's going to train that heart, prevent heart disease, like still prevent that high blood pressure, improve our cholesterol, all of that. So I think if you're really wanting to tap in to a little more motivation on the health side and for chronic conditions in the future, knowing that cardio can tap into preventing those chronic conditions is super important.
Yeah, heart disease is a big killer, right, in our country. So making sure that we're taking care of that heart health is huge. And there's almost no entry into this, because going for a walk or jog or a run is absolutely free, and you don't need any equipment or a gym or anything like that. So I really like that for anybody that wants to get started, that anybody can do cardio. So that's really cool. I want to talk about the intensity a little bit more. I want to talk about the types a little bit more too, and differentiate physical activity versus exercise too, because we talked about that epoch and some of the intensities, but Also NEAT. So another four letters here. What does this mean? So non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Really, really big factor here, because this is the energy that we're expending while we're doing everything other than exercise, eat, and sleep. If you're not exercising, eating, or sleeping, then yeah, that if you're burning energy, then that's that NEAT. So if that can go up just from activities of daily living, walking the dog, gardening, doing the dishes, shopping, whatever the heck it is, right? That can also be a big calorie burner for us. And another really cool piece of research that I saw in the last week or so, it was about jittering, just like moving around at your desk, or people, like jitter your leg. I do that every once in a while. Burning calories seated in the soleus muscle, so like just below your calf. They showed that it can burn up to 1,000 calories a day. I don't think I want to be that jittery. I don't think I want to be quite that jittery. That's very extreme, but it does kind of paint the picture of that, like non-exercise activity does add up over time.
Oh yeah, I'm always parking further from my grocery stores, or I even just think about, oh, I can make 2 trips to go move this piece of equipment or grab this piece of paper, and just getting more movement throughout your day. So crucial.
Yeah, for sure. So lower intensities, again, you can do at a comfortable pace. If we're going up from that NEAT to lower intensity, like exercise, not just physical activity, walking, swimming, dancing, whatever you like to do, something you can do kind of comfortably. Maybe a good place to start for a lot of people if you don't have that aerobic base, right? And then onto the moderate intensity, it can be the same activity, even just a little bit more strenuous, right? So walking to jogging, easy bike ride to maybe a speedier one, just shooting basketball to maybe driving to the basket or doing some agility drills, something like that, right? And then the higher, just vigorous, what it feels like if you've been there. You got that heart rate really going, calories are way up. This is from jogging to sprinting, moderate bike into like those high intensity intervals or hills or things like that. And yeah, that talk test is a really good way to gauge your intensity. But I do want to talk about impact though, because people think sometimes of high impact, high intensity the same way. If you're getting started, start with almost exclusively lower impact movements. Things like the bike, things like the rower, elliptical, AMT, adaptive movement trainer, those things where you're not physically picking up your foot and then pounding on those connective tissues, right? Mm-hmm. Like what happens with the higher impact stuff, with walking or running, plyo, all the jumping stuff, right? So if you're a beginner, start with the lower impact stuff. It's going to save your joints and connective tissues while also building your fitness level, because your muscles and your organs, like your heart, tend to adapt a lot faster than your connective tissue. So if you're really getting after it way too hard, way too fast, some bad things might happen along the way.
Yeah, and I just saw Vincent had a really good question in there. He asked, where do most of the physiological adaptations take place when cardiovascular fitness improves? Lungs, heart, capillaries, powerhouse of the cell, etc. It's all over. But I do want to tap into like the cellular benefits. A lot of times we like see benefits when we're losing weight, or we actually can see on our heart rate monitors that our resting heart rate has dropped because our stroke volume, the amount of blood we pump out each pump, is stronger. But the cellular benefits is pretty cool when it comes to cardiovascular adaptations. So basically, from cardio exercise, you can increase the endurance of your cells and like tissues to oxidative stress. It increases like vascularization, energy metabolism, this thing called neurotrope synthesis, and they all play a role in neurogenesis, which is the creation of new neurons, improves your brain memory and brain neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to rewire and modify itself throughout life, something we have to do for forever. So it's so cool to see that cardio improves your brain's ability to create neurons and continue being efficient as we age. So I don't think there's a main area that cardio, you can correct me if I'm wrong, David, a main area that doing cardio affects the most, because it taps into all these different areas. There are just certain areas that people focus on and notice more than other areas, like those cellular benefits I just stated.
Yeah, very, very well said. Yeah, I agree. There's just an abundance and all of those things. I love the question too, the powerhouse of the cell, mitochondria. But I think the cognitive benefits are just overlooked. The emotional benefits that you get from hard exercise, whether it's moderate to hard strength training or cardio, I can't say enough about it because I get that every day and every week, and it just makes me a better, nicer, more productive person. And so I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, and I think just doing cardio though in a way that you enjoy it. Some people look at getting on that elliptical or treadmill as a way to lose weight, and you dread it because you're like, I got to be on this thing for like 30 minutes to 45 minutes today. This sucks. So think about those different ways to get cardio in throughout your day, because the benefits of both HIIT and LISS are there. So you might not want to do steady state one day and you want to do a circuit. So you get 3 different exercises and you go through them, different intervals, or intervals where you work and then rest, work and then rest. So trying different ways to find what you enjoy, because if you're not going to enjoy it, you're most likely not going to stick with it. And life is just way too dang short to not enjoy any of your time here, right?
Yeah, at least some of it or most of it. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do,
yeah,
right?
You got to push
But
through.
yeah, but most of the time you don't want to be dreading every single workout or every time that you exercise. So yeah, good point right there. But I do want to give some examples of some of those that you just talked about, Hannah. It's pretty easy to talk about the low and moderate stuff, as long as you're doing any exercise modality and there's no big swings of intensity. Pick your poison, pick what you want to do, whether it's a jog or you're on the step mill or whatever it is. But, if you're doing higher intensity stuff, you can run a circuit, which can be both strength and cardio exercise. You can do like AMRAP training, where you do as many rounds as possible of a couple of exercises, and you get a few minutes to do that. So for a circuit, it would be like 3 rounds. Pick 3 exercises and a certain rep range and get after it as hard as you can for those 3 rounds for your circuit. Same thing for your AMRAP. Maybe doesn't matter how many exercises, but you pick 2, 3, 4 exercises, give yourself 10 minutes, see how many times you can get through that. And maybe if you do that similar pattern, that similar routine, you can see if you can get through it faster and gain some density along the way. There's a bunch of other ones like Tabata training, EMOM, stuff like that. Do you have any ones that you like more than others, Hannah?
With my class on site lately, I've been doing EMOM, so every minute on the minute. So you have a certain amount of reps you want to hit for this exercise. The quicker you get it done, the more rest you get for the rest of that minute. And then at the top of the next minute, like you start again. And it's crazy to see how you're depleting your energy systems throughout, because that first round, you're like, if it's 10 burpees, get 10 done and you have like 30 seconds of rest left. And then the next one, you're like, oh, I got 20 seconds of rest left. And then you get to the point where you're barely getting those 10 done.
Yeah.
And it's just cool to see you've depleted that ATP. You're really tapping into the oxidative at that point, but you're still having to do that fast, explosive movement. So you're still in that anaerobic zone as well. So it's really cool to see.
Yeah, EMOM's a great one that can use any of these. Yeah, if you do intervals, just that work to rest ratio, play around with them. I use Tabata a lot, that 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off. It's really tough, but you can also go to a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio, all the way up to like 1-to-4 work to rest. You just want to make sure that you recover enough if you're pushing into vigorous, that you can work very hard and not drop into that moderate territory. So as we're finishing up here, as we're sending out all the handout and all the materials, there will be some exercise examples for all of those that we just talked about: circuit, AMRAP, EMOM, different intervals and things like that. And then if you have any questions following up with that, feel free to throw it in the Teams page or reach out to us.
Yeah, great questions and great chat today, as always, David.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate your comments, appreciate your questions, and we'll follow up on the Teams page. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.